Today I'm at Parkville Station, one of the new stations in the Melbourne Metro Tunnel, due to open in a few days on Sunday, November 30. What is the background to it? What service can we expect? And how can its benefits be maximised? I'll try and answer all that in the next half hour or so. Melbourne's Metro Tunnel comprises two tracks under the Melbourne CBD that link existing suburban rail lines on different sides of the city. On these tracks are 5 underground stations. Arden, Parkville and Anzac provide new CBD fringe rail coverage, supplementing trams, while Town Hall and State Library enable connections at the existing Flinders Street and Melbourne Central stations. Those not from Melbourne may be unaware of how radical the idea of a frequent underground metropolitan line that allows cross-city travel without changing trains is here, even though Melbourne has toyed with the concept for nearly a century. Flinders Street in the 1920s was reputed to be one of the busiest stations in the world. A 1929 scheme aimed to provide relief by running trains from Richmond to North Melbourne via new underground stations east and north of the CBD. As well as lessening Flinders Street crowding, this would relieve trams, stimulate development around other parts of the CBD, and permit through travel from one side of the CBD to the other. Not only that, but service was likely to be frequent day and night, because in the 1920s and 30s, the rail network was used for a variety of trips, including shopping in the middle of the day and Saturday mornings, travel from theatre and cinemas, as well as peak period commutes. We know this is likely because trains, as well as trams and buses in established areas, actually ran more frequently over longer hours than they do now, with 15-minute frequencies to late at night common, except on Sundays. The Great Depression and World War II meant the 1929 scheme didn't get built. Even maintenance was deferred. There was some revived interest in fixing rail's backlog after World War II, and some things got done, but the world had changed radically. Rail's role for both freight and passengers shrunk. Suburbs expanded and more families bought cars. Industry and shopping moved from inner to outer suburbs, which became more desirable than run-down closer-in neighbourhoods. The 1950s and 60s saw some suburban stations added to the network, track amplification and electrification extensions to serve outer areas. New timetables added peak express services to growing fringe areas, but at the cost of reduced frequencies off-peak and or closer in. After arriving at Flinders Street, many trains from the east and south continued through to then Spencer Street Station, North Melbourne and beyond. Thus you could catch a one-seat ride from the southeast to the northwest, with trains going via the viaduct. Although by the 1960s, off-peak and evening frequencies had fallen to 20 minutes, so it was not all day turn up and go. Passenger rail was evolving from serving diverse trips to a one-trick pony for peak period city commuter transport from the expanding suburbs. The CBD might have lost much of its manufacturing and retail, but it was building higher with booming office employment. Rail planning became very much about coping with peak commuter loads to the city, with average trips getting longer and clustering around the peaks. Other roles, including off-peak travel and trips between suburbs, were not priorities. Exacerbated by the lower frequencies of the 1960s and 70s versus the 1930s in most established areas. Any investment in rail, for it to happen, had to strengthen this narrow suburbs to CBD function. While most of the rail network continued to decline, we got the gleaming city loop at its centre. Conceived in the late 1960s, built in the 1970s, and opened in stages in the 1980s. Pretty much everyone from the suburbs got a one-seat ride to not 2, but 5 CBD stations, 3 of them underground. That relieved passenger crowding at Flinders Street and made trips to parts of the Hoddle grid shorter, as there is no need to change to a tram. However, there were major downsides. Some trips, including to Flinders Street, became longer. There was, and still partly is, a confusing midday reversal. The ability to make one-seat cross-city trips was lost. The city loop just brought commuters from the suburbs into the city, but didn't much help other journeys, including short trips in the CBD environs and a bit outside. That would remain the job of trams that were increasingly stuck in traffic and, much later, overloaded by the perverse effects of the free tram zone. There were then 4 rail line groups, each occupying a portal on the loop. These were Clifton Hill, Caulfield, Burnley and Northern. Each loop portal had up to 4 lines looping back on themselves. Having all trips run via the city loop worked for a couple of decades when rail usage was growing only slowly. However, it was inherently unreliable. A delay on one line could affect several more. 30 years ago, expectations of rail network expansion in Victoria were low. There would be the odd electrification, such as to Water Gardens in 2002, but that would be it. In the early noughties, interest in regional rail had revived, but not metropolitan rail. Greed and naivety led to the collapse of the first round of rail franchising, with government having to fill an unbudgeted for black hole. The government hoped that people would blame the surviving private operator Connex rather than it for the increasing number of delays and cancellations, exacerbated by surging patronage. The political wish to transfer responsibility and perhaps industrial relations were perhaps the only reasons left to keep franchising, as it was no longer necessarily thought cheaper than government operation. However, each new recontracting made arrangements less commercial franchise and more fee-for-service, as no one could figure out how to fairly price risk. Thus the government ending up taking on most of it and simplifying contracts. More so than elsewhere, transport bureaucrats were obsessed with franchising, ticketing and branding. Not really the fundamentals of good service, are they? Apart from the extra peak train or 2 desperately shoehorned in, there is little progress with either timetables or infrastructure. In 2005, Monash professor Graham Curry floated an idea for a north-south rail tunnel under the CBD, between Melbourne University and South Yarra. However, Jim Betts, the Director of Public Transport, hosed down expectations, saying that people may well be living on the moon before Melbourne got its next major rail expansion. Events, though, overtook the government's thinking, with patronage surging and reliability plummeting. So much so that its management of suburban growth generally, and rail services in particular, became a major political problem for the Brumby government. Regional rail link to separate regional from suburban lines was being planned, but this did not sufficiently relieve pressure on key busy lines. Ideas for underground road and rail tunnels existed, but were unfunded. Urgent fixes were needed for the problems happening today. Maintaining the complex 4-group system of everything running via the city loop was untenable due to trains crossing each other's paths, causing numerous knock-on delays. And so some trips, and increasingly lines, were taken out of the city loop. A cross-city group was formed by running trains that came through Newport, through Southern Cross and Flinders Street to Frankston. Passengers from these lines had to change to reach a loop station, but the trade-off was improved reliability and higher frequency. For passengers travelling from Flinders Street, this was indeed the case, with reliability restored to approximately 2005 levels by 2013. Cross-city running has never been consistently communicated to passengers. Its implementation on a fragile system, where drivers changed at Flinders Street, made transposals frequent. But in theory, and sometimes in practice, it enabled access from one side of the city to the other without changing trains, like a modern metro elsewhere, and what metro tunnel passengers will come to expect. As for the longer-term initiatives, the 2006 Meeting Our Transport Challenges plan to build a third track on the Dandenong line did not proceed. But the government was more serious about rail service a couple of years later, even if passengers left behind on station platforms didn't feel it. That's because by then discussion had stepped up when Sir Rod Eddington presented his East-West Link Needs Assessment report in April 2008. This recommended jobs growth in the Parkville area around here, a regional rail link from Werribee to Sunshine via Tarneet, what we now know as the Metro Tunnel, Doncaster public transport improvements, and the controversial East-West Link freeway connection. The government's response came in the Victorian Transport Plan in December 2008.
In fact, more people than ever want to live, work and raise a family in our state. To support this strong statewide growth, over the next 30 years, the Victorian Government will deliver major transport and infrastructure projects. Up to 70 new trains, as well as new rail extensions, including Craigieburn East, South Morang, Sunbury and Melton, will increase services.
The global financial crisis of that year ushered a Keynesian-style fiscal loosening from the federal government. Victoria was able to snaffle some of the money going to build the line via Tarneet, that being for Geelong trains. Train patronage was still surging. There were some high-profile network meltdowns involving breaking with the Siemens trains, failing air conditioners and infrastructure faults, most famously on Oaks Day 2008. By this time, there was roughly bipartisan support for improved metropolitan rail services, though priorities between the parties were somewhat different. Apart from the Doncaster bus improvements, the Eddington projects were a long way from happening. There was a need to do things more quickly, including reformed timetables and operating practices. The 2010 election saw the defeat of the Brumby Labor government, with deteriorating rail services a major issue in marginal suburban seats. After a period of blaming Connex, the then private operator, it had taken a more hands-on role with rail, though this came too late for measurable improvements before the election. The incoming Baillieu coalition government kept improving metropolitan rail services, which bore fruit with improved reliability by 2013. It commissioned a lot of inquiries, reviews and plans, but did not do a lot of building. One of the plans done was the Network Development Plan, Metropolitan Rail, of 2012. This was a plan that sought to roll out as much frequency as possible, as soon as possible, with as little infrastructure as possible. This envisaged trains on key lines running every 10 minutes all day by 2016, with most of the rest following by 2021. The NDP was very much a sweat the assets plan based on maximum frequency as soon as possible. It was perhaps the most detailed rail planning document ever made public to Victorians. Future governments would be more cagey, especially on service level matters. Under the NDP, the inner core, which would include the City Loop and the planned, but then not funded Metro Tunnel, would enjoy 5-minute frequencies. That is significant because such high frequencies on the Metro Tunnel could enable major CBD tram network reform, where a service only every 10 minutes would not. Tram reform would have delivered benefits in its own right and strengthened the funding case for the Metro Tunnel that could have enabled it. Progress made implementing the NDP included weekend trains every 10 minutes to Ringwood, Dandenong and Frankston, and in 2014, the Dandenong line boosted to every 10 minutes on weekdays. Later stages of the plan assumed infrastructure such as the Metro Tunnel, Airport Rail, City Loop reconfiguration and more suburban extensions. Party problems saw a leadership change to Dennis Napthine, who had bigger ideas on infrastructure. Most famously, the East-West Road link, but also a Melbourne rail link between South Yarra and Southern Cross. This would avoid the need to disrupt Swanston Street and would serve Fishermans Bend but not Parkville. I should mention that a lot of land in Fishermans Bend got rezoned around then as well.
As Melbourne's population grows, more people are using our rail network. The Melbourne Rail Link will allow us to add more services, improve reliability, and provide capacity for 30% more passengers in the peak hour. The project will deliver twin tunnels from Southern Cross to South Yarra, new underground stations at Fisherman's Bend and Domain, new underground platforms at Southern Cross and South Yarra to enable interchanges with other services.
Federal and Victorian politics were going in opposite directions in 2013 and 2014. Labor and coalition governments respectively were struggling and would both be defeated. Tony Abbott, as Prime Minister, supported federal money for roads but not passenger rail. So the East-West link became the favoured project, not the Melbourne Rail Link. Barely a year later, the Victorian coalition lost government after a single term. So none of their rail infrastructure concepts really got started. Taking over was Daniel Andrews' Labor, who rushed headlong into a major infrastructure program based on the removal of 50 level crossings. That was funded by controversially cancelling East-West Link and leasing the Port of Melbourne. Labor's agenda was soon supplemented by other major projects, including the Metro Tunnel, whose business case came out in 2016. As announced in April 2015, this went back to the original alignment under Swanston Street. After controversy, a latter announcement flagged a deeper location to minimise disruption, but there would be no Metro Tunnel station at South Yarra. The Metro Tunnel has several justifications. Firstly, it would improve access to the CBD. In their words, supporting the knowledge economy and growing jobs. It would do this by providing new stations, enabling much faster access to areas like Parkville compared to existing Swanston and Elizabeth Street corridor tram services. With demand shifted from tram to train, scope exists to more evenly distribute trams across the CBD and not just have them concentrated on the Swanston Street corridor. The Sunbury-Pakenham-Cranbourne corridor via the Metro Tunnel serves 3 major greenfields growth areas along with opportunities for high population densities closer in. Modern signalling and new bigger trains will increase capacity. The business case points out that getting Sunbury trains on their own lines frees up city loop space for the Craigieburn and Upfield lines. Both are or have potential to serve growth areas in the north. The Craigieburn line is already one of the busiest relative to the service it gets. As well as supporting the medical and education precinct at Parkville, the Metro Tunnel involves a new station at Arden, which is slated for infill development. While lacking the land space of Fishermans Bend, that the government is sort of lukewarm on, Arden will soon have vastly better public transport access, especially from the west and northwest, as well as the southeast. The business case for the Metro Tunnel was predicated on frequent all-day service, on not just the Metro Tunnel, but trains every 10 minutes on other major lines, including Sandringham, Craigieburn, and at least part of Upfield. Billboards promised more trains more often across Melbourne. After that, maybe then we'd have an end to the skew where favoured lines in the south and east had frequent service, but those in the north and west did not. And Melbourne would be more like Perth or Sydney, which enjoyed frequent 7-day service at most stations. However, this was a government very different to the last. It pursued a strong infrastructure agenda, adding even more level crossing removals and other major projects to its list. Some of these, including the new HCMT trains, Dandenong train stabling, Craigieburn line duplication, and even more level crossing removals, supported the Metro Tunnel project. But while the justification for the level crossing removals included more frequent metro train services, little of this happened. No new metro lines gained 7-day 10-minute service since 2014's Dandenong line upgrade under the Coalition. Even cheap-to-fix 30 to 40-minute gaps remained unfilled, apart from small Werribee, Williamstown and Frankston upgrades in 2021. Bus network reform also basically stalled, despite a bus plan being released in 2021 and a major network review announced before the 2022 state election, but cancelled after the victory. Midday public transport operating every 10 minutes. Most notable are rail lines to the south and east, and maybe 2/3 of tram routes. Fishermans Bend buses were boosted on weekdays. Overall though, Melbourne's frequent network hasn't grown very much, despite travel patterns shifting from the intense traditional peaks. This brings us to recent times. The pandemic reduced peak commuter travel to CBD jobs. Governments since 2014 stalled the NDP rail frequency upgrades, giving us in 2025 a less frequent service than was envisaged for 2016, nearly a decade prior. Continual level crossing removals, road construction and train testing often replace trains with buses, further discouraging ridership, especially for passengers with alternatives. So instead of commencing on a busy and large frequent all-day network, the Metro Tunnel will start on a quieter network that is mostly still infrequent outside peaks, a different context to what was envisaged in 2012 or even 2016. So what is happening with the Metro Tunnel commencement? As you may have seen, it will be staged. The most important date will be February 1, 2026, when the full timetable for the Metro Tunnel will commence. Another key date, of course, is this Sunday, November 30, where a limited service will operate. And then there's another very important date in mid-2026 that we don't know precisely. I'll run through all three sequentially. The initial communication for the commencement, what the government is calling the summer start, said it would be early December. However,
That's been brought forward to November 30.
Testing of the fire alarm system is now commencing. Please ignore all signs and tones. This is a test only.
If you are a regular traveller, nothing need change. You still travel according to the old stopping patterns and timetables. However, if you do want to ride the Metro Tunnel, then you can. Metro Tunnel services will operate over limited hours during the middle of the day. Trains will be every 20 minutes, with these over and above the regular timetable. So it's more of a come and ride thing rather than a serious commuter service initially. But it offers some benefits. For instance, to sort out teething troubles before large numbers start using it, get people used to platform screen doors, encourage Christmas shopping in the CBD, and not least meet the politically heralded 2025 start date. The government hoping there will be minimal disruption to existing travel patterns, as the new trips will operate in addition to existing unchanged routing and timetables on all lines. The big switch. As mentioned before, 1 February is what the government is calling the big switch. Messages here have been mixed. For instance, there is mention of a lot of train, tram and bus timetables changing. I'll quote from the Premier's release: "A new timetable will be in place everywhere, including buses, trams, regional and metropolitan trains." I'm going to assume this is describing the full extent of envisaged timetable changes in 2026, not just those happening on 1st of February. On the latter, we can be certain about the following. Sunbury and Pakenham Craigieburn line trains will shift out of separate city loop portals to being joined via 5 new stations at Arden, Parkville, State Library, Town Hall and Anzac. That will form a through line underneath the CBD with frequent service. How frequent? We're told 3 to 4 minutes in peak periods. Not a lot different from now, especially from the Dandenong side. But I would expect that there will be some use of the West Footscray turnback. Outside peaks, a service will operate every 10 minutes or better from first train to last train between West Footscray and Dandenong station. That's an unheard of service level for any public transport route in Melbourne, especially at night where the previous best frequency on any line is 20 minutes. However, I do think 10 minutes is a bit light on for the inner core, where a 5-minute service would be more compatible with metro-style, high-volume, short-trip needs and more reliable if one train is cancelled. My observation of Metro Tunnel testing confirmed a 10-minute midday service was being operated. Without such a frequent core, you can't really do tram reform and thus reap the full cascading benefits of the Metro Tunnel project. For comparison, Sydney's Metro has a 5-minute interpeak service, while Inner Perth's rail network enjoys 7.5-minute frequencies every day. East of Dandenong, trains are likely to alternate between East Pakenham and Craigieburn to provide the outer portions with a 20-minute service. That compares to now, where gaps can be 30 minutes at night and as long as 70 minutes on Sunday mornings. The other great thing is that forced transfers will be pretty much a thing of the past for Pakenham and Craigieburn passengers, with the trunk almost always double the frequency of the branches. There are 2 things that aren't clear, at least to me. First of all, night network. If they stick with the network-wide hourly frequency, then that could feature hourly trains from Sunbury to either East Pakenham or Craigieburn, with the other line getting a shuttle from Dandenong. Although if they were feeling generous, they could avoid that by running a half-hourly service to Dandenong with trains alternating east. Secondly, what does Sunshine get? On the west side, some trains will terminate at West Footscray, some at Water Gardens, and others at the end of the line at Sunbury. The termini will alternate between Sunbury and Water Gardens most of the time, with Sunbury generally getting a 20-minute service and Water Gardens a 10-minute service. However, the latter won't be to last train. In something bound to annoy after 9 p.m. travellers, half the trains will finish at West Footscray. Hence the Premier's media release saying that the frequent service to Water Gardens is 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. only. Still, the every 20-minute late evening service that Tottenham to Sunbury will get is better than the current 30-minute gaps. Also, finishing the 10-minute frequent service at around 9 p.m. for the western portion is still better than happens now on the Frankston line, where it finishes at 7 p.m. on weekends. It's not just the Sunbury, Pakenham and Craigieburn lines that are changing. A big justification for the Metro Tunnel is the cascading effect where it frees up capacity. In this case, the Frankston line returns to operating via the City Loop, like it did 15 or so years ago. Like the Pakenham and Craigieburn lines, it will be running anti-clockwise all day. Trains from Newport, including Werribee's, Laverton's and Williamstown's, will terminate at Flinders Street. These are operating under special arrangements until late April 2026 due to construction works. I won't go into all those here. But it will be restored later in the year. Keep watching. What we don't know is the Frankston line's frequency. I'd normally say the Frankston line does not justify any extra frequency, as it's already every 5 minutes in peaks, 10 minutes daytime and 20 minutes night. Better than any individual line on the network. The main exception is Sunday mornings, where it's still hourly until ridiculously late in the direction towards Frankston. Also, like all of Melbourne's train network, it starts way too late on Good Friday and most Christmas days. However, the Metro Tunnel removes the Craigieburn and Pakenham lines from South Yarra and Richmond, with the latter affecting sports goers. Melbourne's notoriously poor evening frequencies make connections between lines after 7 p.m. a major gamble. For good evening connectivity at these stations, the Frankston line will need to keep its 10-minute service running until later at night. There may be scope to evenly stagger times with the Sandringham line, but that collapses for trips going into the city, as these lines take different paths. Here is what the Big Build website says about frequencies. The 1,000 weekly services on the Sunbury line largely comprise off-peak frequency boosts that add 3 trains per hour each way as far as Water Gardens, to double frequency from 20 to 10 minutes. That's better than the impression you might have got if you looked in the brochure for stations from Tottenham to Water Gardens. Half of those will extend to Sunbury, doubling their 40-minute frequency to 20 minutes. Evenings also gain with an upgrade from every 30 to every 20 minutes at worst and every 10 minutes at best. There will likely be some Sunday morning uplifts, improving to 20-minute maximum waits. If Sunbury is lucky, they might get some shoulder peak improvements as well. The 100 extra weekly services at the Dandenong end will largely be additions to cut maximum waits to 20 minutes for Pakenham and Craigieburn. The main times to benefit are after 7 p.m. weekends and Sunday mornings. As an example, improving from 30 to 20 minutes requires 1 train each way per hour extra. Multiply that by 2 for a return trip, and by 2 again for both lines, then by 10 for the number of hours per week you might be upgrading, and you get 40. Fixing up early weekend mornings and adding shoulder peaks would likely get you to 100. Noting that counting trains is a poor measure as lengthening runs to avoid transfers and improve frequencies from Dandenong inwards is not rewarded. What else is happening on February 1? The only thing we know for sure is the new Route 241 bus will operate. This will serve at least Arden and Parkville. I'm going to speculate that it will serve other inner north stations too, providing an east-west connection and replacing other routes like 202, 401 and 403. To summarise, the February big switch marks the Sunbury, Pakenham and Craigieburn lines using the Metro Tunnel full time with 10-minute or better frequencies on the central portion. The Frankston line goes anti-clockwise to Flinders Street via the City Loop. Werribee, Laverton and Williamstown line trains will terminate at Flinders Street and not continue through to Richmond, just for the moment. Plus, the 241 bus will start. Maybe there'll be other minor tweaks here and there, but I think they're trying to keep the focus on what is strictly necessary for the Metro Tunnel to operate. Overall, this is a major scaling back from the day one service plan in the Metro Tunnel business case, which featured 10-minute all-day frequencies through not just the Metro Tunnel, but also Sandringham, Craigieburn and at least part of the Upfield line. However, frequency between West Footscray and Water Gardens should be better than envisaged.
Services departing State Library platforms 1 and 2 are the 9:16 Arden, stopping all stations to Arden.
Now we come to mid-2026. Those paying attention will be aware that the May 2025 state budget funded frequency upgrades for 4 non-metro tunnel but somewhat related lines. These upgrades deliver a bit more of the improvements envisaged in the 2016 Metro Tunnel business case. The biggest known network change will be the restoration of a cross-city group, allowing one-seat rides from Newport to South Yarra via Southern Cross and Flinders Street. This has been timed to start after the works around Newport finish, which is slated for mid-April 2026, so it can't be any earlier than that. But instead of Werribee, Laverton and or Williamstown trains continuing to Frankston, they will instead operate to Sandringham, as the Frankstons all get put back in the City Loop, replacing the Pakenhams and Craigieburns that were taken out. Currently, each of the 3 lines through Newport in the west operates every 20 minutes, with 2 of them forming Frankston line trains every 10 minutes. That's currently incompatible with Sandringham line trains, as they are every 15 minutes on weekdays. So, to maintain an even pattern, the Sandringham line will improve to every 10 minutes weekday into peak. That makes Sandringham the 4th significant corridor, after Frankston, Dandenong and Water Gardens, to get a 10-minute inter-peak Monday to Friday service. There are a couple of Sandringham line timetable matters that are not clear. Weekend Sandringham line frequencies are about half Frankston's between about 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. More specifically, Sandringham weekend daytime trains are every 20 minutes versus every 10 minutes for Frankston. And on Sunday mornings, Sandringham trains have 40-minute gaps versus 20 minutes for Frankston. There has been no indication that this will change. Thus, the cross-city group will only operate frequently Monday to Friday and not 7 days as currently. This represents a downgrade for Richmond and South Yarra, who lose their Dandenong trains to the Metro Tunnel. Then there's the Craigieburn, Upfield and Werribee line improvements. Craigieburn, and at least part of Upfield, had huge improvements planned in the 2016 business case, including 10-minute all-day frequencies. Craigieburn particularly deserves this as the busiest metropolitan line relative to its currently low service levels. For a long time, the government was quiet as to the service levels Craigieburn and Upfield were going to get. Indeed, it seemed for a while they were going to get nothing. Fortunately, sense prevailed and the government announced some off-peak upgrades. These won't deliver the anticipated 10-minute frequencies, but they will halve maximum gaps from 40 to 20 minutes with extra evening, Sunday morning, and for Craigieburn, shoulder peak trips added. The Craigieburn line especially has a lot of buses coordinated to its train timetables, especially at Craigieburn station. These services get good usage. It will be interesting to see what happens to bus frequencies to maintain connections to the upgraded train services, especially at night. It should be noted that bus planners have a particular constraint. My understanding is that unlike for recoordination with V-line trains, where there have been major frequency boosts, metropolitan bus recoordination may be cost neutral, limiting what can be done. But I'm not completely sure on that. Let's hope that there are some surprises there. The fourth line to see upgrades is Werribee. Its peak timetable will get an extra 2 trains per hour. That is from a 10 to a 7.5 minute frequency. Werribee was supposed to get peak frequency upgrades when the Geelong line was routed via the regional rail link in 2015, but these were not delivered at the time. Like with Craigieburn, Werribee's boost has a lot of implications for coordinated bus services, particularly at Williams Landing, Hoppers Crossing and Werribee. The Wyndham area currently has a shortage of buses, with some timetables actually having bigger gaps in peaks than off-peaks. Having buses connect with every second train would require an improvement in bus frequencies to every 15 minutes, while connecting with every third train may involve a downgrade to an awkward 22.5 minute frequency. Let's hope they choose the first. To summarise, by the middle of 2026, the proportion of stations that enjoy 7-day trains every 15 minutes or better will increase from about 33 to 38% of the network thanks to the Metro Tunnel and related service upgrades. Sandringham's upgrade will increase the Monday to Friday portion to a touch over 40%. These will be the first substantial extensions of off-peak 10-minute metro service since the Dandenong line upgrades under the Liberals in 2014, and hopefully mark the closing of a lost decade of service from 2015, where despite having the infrastructure and rolling stock to expand frequent service, the current government chose not to do so. From the transferring passengers' point of view, our new frequent metro tunnel risks smashing into a brick wall of largely infrequent service on unreformed established lines with 20, 30 and even 40-minute gaps still common. The only way to reap the full benefits of the metro tunnel is to spread all-day frequent service to more than a minority of the network, something we have yet to see announced or funded. Such improvements would also aid the government's credibility, as many passengers have experienced years of intermittent bus replacements, with few benefits returned to them in improved frequencies. What about future upgrades? The next year is already looking more promising than the last lost decade for metro train frequencies. February will see the Sundry line to Water Gardens. Mid-year, the Sandringham line on weekdays, going to every 10 minutes, along with Craigieburn and Upfield never worse than 20 minutes. Hopefully that momentum remains, with more announcements to come. I would suggest these as the top 5 front runners, in about this order. Other catch-ups needed include Melton's every 20 minutes on weekends, earlier weekend starts for both Geelong and Melton, and to finish off the metro network, Glen Waverley and Inner Hurstbridge going to every 10 minutes. Plus, of course, the Metro Tunnel core to every 5 minutes with complementary tram reform. This is a summary of the Metro Tunnel and the services we will get, as is currently known. There may well be tweaks and changes. I would hope that the February 1 and mid-year timetable changes are not the end, but just the beginning of a rolling more trains more often program that is key to getting the most benefit from the metropolitan rail, tram and bus networks.
And always remember to touch on your Mikey at the start of your journey.